End of the day, we asked the author, we said, well, could you participate? And she said, sure. So what we ended up doing was we ended up posting 10 questions for her to answer. Things like, Christina wants to know where the bees idea came from, Jeff is wondering why I included the interracial relationship, etc. And a couple days later, we got this back from her. She said, dear students, it's an exceptionally nice honor to have you reading my novel in your modern American literature class. I'm extremely impressed with your weblog, which I've been following. What fun for the author to listen in on your discussions and see the wonderful and provocative artistic interpretations that you've created. The experience has opened my eyes to new ideas about my own work. And she went on for 2,500 words answering my kids' questions. Now, at that moment, they knew more about that book than just about anybody in the world knew about that book, aside from the author. And they could not have gotten that from me. I could not have taught them this. I could not have shared that with them. One of my journalism students was mentored by a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist from the Washington Post as she wrote her story for publication. I could not have given her the help or the information that he gave her. And it's just all about me facilitating that connection. That's really what it was about, right? Giving her the opportunity to work with someone who knew a lot more than I did about what it is we were studying. So we have to start looking at our classrooms as ways to connect, not only to experts, but to other kids around the world. And I think this is another great example of that. This is a project that was called the Flat Classrooms Project. And this was a teacher in Georgia and a teacher in Bangladesh. And what they decided to do was they had read Thomas Friedman's The World is Flat, which has been very popular in terms of people talking about how to conceptualize some of the shifts that are happening. And in that book, he has a number of flatteners that he talks about. And so what they decided to do was they decided to take one student from Georgia, hook that person up with one student from Bangladesh, and that the two of them or three of them would study one particular flattener. So if you go to the one here, How the World Wide Web Has Changed the World, you can see that this is Salvi from Bangladesh, Trey from Georgia. And what they did was they wrote a hypertext linked report that was not just kind of based on book research or online research, but that included videos, that included kind of screencasts on how to do particular things. You can see there's Trey in Georgia, there's Salvi in his video. So it was a multimedia hypertext kind of production that they shared with the rest of the world so that other people could learn from this as well. But look, here's the choice. Vicky could have taught her kids in Georgia what life is like in Bangladesh. And Julie could have taught her kids in Bangladesh what life is like in Georgia. But instead they said, no, let's connect them. Let's connect them to one another and let them teach each other. And by looking at these results, that came out much better than the two of them simply standing there and running their own projects or doing their own thing in the classroom. So we have to begin looking at ourselves as connectors. The other thing is that our kids in this environment can really teach what they know. I won't play this, but this is a great podcast by kids in Omaha, Nebraska from Radio Willow Web. And they did a unit on ants. And if you listen to this, which I hope you do, first graders, this little girl comes on, she goes, hi, you've come to our first grade classroom and we're going to teach you about ants. We're going to talk about how ants went up in the space shuttle, how ants, historically have evolved, et cetera, et cetera. And it's cute. It's really interesting to listen to. But the point is that those kids in Omaha have an audience for the work. And they are teaching what they know about ants. I know my kids would have reported out what they know about ants on a piece of paper that would have ended up in their Friday folder, which comes home every Friday full of paper, of all the paperwork that they've done, which I then sign some of it and it goes back, the rest of it comes into a big pile, we recycle it, make paper airplanes out of it, throw it away, it doesn't matter, they don't care what we do with that paper. I want my kids to have an audience. I want my kids' work to be heard. I want them to be able to teach, because they can. What a concept. Because they can in this environment. If we're just talking about four walls and paper being passed back and forth any longer, we're doing our kids a disservice. My kids are being done a disservice by my school. And I'm trying to, be gentle about starting a conversation as to how we can make that a little bit different. I just want to show you one more example of this. Let me turn the speakers on here real fast. Sounds like I'm getting some back. Oh, you know what? I know what it is. It's this. There we go. Okay. So this is This is Marco Torres, who's a teacher outside of LA in San Fernando. And he has a lot of kids who come from the barrio. Most of them don't speak English, they don't write English. And so he's trying, I love the way he talks about this. He says, I have to find a channel to reach them. I have to find a way to connect to them. And one way that he's found that works really well is video. And now Marco is extremely talented here, all right? He knows a lot. He's an Apple Distinguished Educator. I mean, he's done a lot of work. So this is high end. But the point is that everything that he asks his kids to do, he says, has to have wings. That's how he talks about it. Has to have a purpose larger than the classroom. And so what they do is they create these film festivals and they create these videos that have a purpose that goes beyond just the classroom. And I just want to show you one of them here real fast. And just take a look at this. Hopefully this is...
This is my mom. This is my dad. This is my mom and dad going inside the car. This is my mom and dad inside the car. My dad is distracted by his phone as he is about to put on his seatbelt. These were my parents.
So I think that's a pretty powerful 30 seconds of video, you know. And there's a lot more sophistication that goes into that than meets the eye, obviously. There is some real sophisticated video technique that goes into that. But the point is, that ran as a public service announcement on television in LA. And it had a real audience and it had a real purpose. So we need to make sure that the work that our kids are doing has meaning, has purpose beyond the classroom. Because just about all of it can in this environment. It's easy to share it out, it's easy to give it audience, and we have to make it real. We can't keep contriving reasons for kids to do stuff in the room. Because there are too many opportunities for them to do things outside of the room. So, at any rate, this is a really challenging moment. It's not so much about our kids as it is about us as individual learners. You know, when I first started writing about blogging, there were probably, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 other people who were writing about these technologies, one of them who's in this room right now. And since that time now, there are literally tens of thousands of students and teachers who are blogging, using wikis, creating podcasts, producing a lot of content and putting it up online. But I have to tell you, the vast majority of that, seems to me at least, to be simply taking what they did in paper and just putting it in digital form and posting it up online. The pedagogies haven't changed at all in terms of how we think about delivering the use of these technologies to kids. And I got to tell you, the pedagogies are vastly different in this environment. They're about building networks, they're about building connections, they're about helping kids become self-sustaining learners. And that's not how we teach in many ways. So ultimately, I think it comes down to us. I really think that the teachers who do this well, teachers like Clarence Fisher and Darren Kerr-Patwa and Konrad Glogowski, to name 3 great Canadian educators in this environment, in this field, they do it well because they understand it for themselves. They are learners in this environment using these tools and making these connections for themselves. And that's why they can deliver it to their students in ways that changes, absolutely changes, transforms their classrooms. Transforms them. So it does come down to you, I think. It comes down to your own learning, your own practice first, because I think you have to understand it, you know, you have to own it before you can give it away. So I would leave you with the same 5 things that I asked the kids to consider yesterday when they were here. And that is, number 1, what are your passions? Find your passions, identify your passions, and be willing to pursue them, because in this environment, anything that you are passionate about, you can build learning communities around. Whether that is the Chicago Cubs, unfortunately, like me, whether it's educational technology, which happens to be the passion of many in this room, or whether it's, you know, cats or whatever. Anything that you are passionate about, you can find other people and you can begin to engage in conversations and connections of teachers and learners in ways that you've never been able to before. Like I said, there are only 2 people in my physical space who will even listen to me talk about this stuff for more than 10 minutes before they just kind of roll their eyes and walk away. But online, it's 24/7, 365. I can access that community. I can learn anytime I want. It's on demand. So that's number 1. Once you find those passions you need to connect to those people. Find those people. connect to them, be willing to engage in conversations with them, and participate, create, and share, right? This is a very participatory time. It's almost incumbent upon us, I think, to share what we know with other people, right? The one thing I love about the web right now is that it's just, we all get smarter together. You know, we give it away as much as we can, and we all benefit from that. It's not like we're keeping it all to ourselves. We don't own the knowledge. We give it away, we share it, and it's that participation that really makes that happen. And in that participation, where are your networks? How are you building your networks, right? So that when our kids, and I said this to them yesterday, so when they leave us, they have a capacity for lifelong learning because of their understanding of how to connect to people who are interested in the same things that they are. That they have opportunities for continued learning the rest of their lives in ways that, again, we haven't had them in the past. And then finally, as educators, I think it's incumbent upon us, as much as possible, to model our own learning for our kids and for our peers, for our colleagues, and the other people who we work with. I wrote a blog post a year ago now, almost. And I just said, SAT questions we'd love to see, right? How does my teacher learn, right? And I really think that kids could do a good job with how much does my teacher know. You can go to ratemyteachers.com and find that out, right? Just look yourselves up and you'll be rated in terms of how much you know. How does my teacher teach? I think they could do a good job with that if it was an SAT question, right? Creative, boring, whatever. I don't know that they could answer the question, how does my teacher learn? I don't know that. I don't know that I could answer that about my teachers because their learning was not transparent. I didn't see how they learned. You need to model that, I think. We need to model that for our kids. They need models for this because right now they're out there kind of flailing away on their own, trying to construct these networks, trying to use these tools to learn, and it's very, very difficult. And we see kind of the depressing results of kids who really haven't been taught, haven't been helped, don't have models for that. So I wish you luck in that journey. I hope that that has in some way inspired you to look at yourselves, look at your learning, and maybe ask some good questions. I have more questions than I have answers, but I think that these are all questions that we have to start having conversations about at this time, and I hope that that's helped get some of those conversations started. Thank you very much for your time this morning.
I think my brain is bulging, and really, Pluto's not a planet? Will, you really are an amazing dude. That was an incredible beginning to all the places that we want to go today. Does anybody have any questions for Will right now? We are going to have lots of chances to talk to him both in a session later and in a panel, but if anybody wants to throw anything out to the table, to the webcast, at the moment we do have a couple of minutes.
There's no clear answer to this, but I'd love to have some of your thoughts on it. How do we create more access for children who are shut out of this opportunity?
Did you hear the question? Which is, how do you create more access for kids who are shut out of the opportunity? And I think that there are on the horizon some ways that we can think about doing that are much more inexpensive and probably will bring a lot more access to kids. But it's so different in schools. We have to look for alternatives, maybe open source alternatives, open technology alternatives that allow us to bring more access in more cheaply. The kids who live in rural environments here in the States, they are being shut out right now. And I just think that at some point there's got to be some national initiative to make sure that those kids get connected. I really feel, I don't know how those kids compete if they don't have regular access, not only to consume the information, but to also contribute the information that they create. I don't know how that happens. I wish I had the magic wand. Yeah.
How do you connect all this learning with the 3 R's? Basically for kids to competently access the internet, they have to know how to read, they have to know reasonably how to write, and all the arithmetic. I remember a number of forums. For example, one of my favorite forums is on a specific sports car, and it's in French. I can't understand half of the responses because they're written in such a low level of language that it is insulting. I mean, how do you get the kids to get to that starting block where it's a decent level?
Well, you know, a lot of people bring up the whole IM thing with this, that, you know, IM is one of those technologies that's really ruining the way that kids use language and spelling and everything else. Look, I think that there's no substitute for traditional understanding of reading and writing and arithmetic for those basics. Absolutely not. We should make sure our kids are absolutely able to use those types of writing and those, you know, in those environments when they're appropriate. But I got to tell you, I think kids do really well using IM too. They communicate very well with that, and I think that communication is what it's all about. So the complexity here then is we have to help kids understand when certain language is appropriate in what environments they're appropriate in. I think we don't probably talk about that very much. Things, you know, kids writing one way here, they just think that transfers over here and that people will understand them, whatever. So I think we have to be more specific about, look, this is a traditional form, this is when you need to write and speak and communicate in ways that are more formal, you know, and then there are other environments here, like on Twitter, you know, like on using a lot of these other technologies, where, you know, maybe standard English doesn't really work that well, and the idea is to get to communicate the information or to get the answer, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with it, but you have to be able to recognize and identify the differences and to separate them out. So I think that's where the real challenge is for us right now, is to help kids understand the differences between the two.
Harold? Just give you an example of learning how to write better. My son started blogging, and when he realized that people were reading his blog, his writing got better.
Yep.
So that made a difference.
Yeah, audience changes everything. Audience changes a lot.
Do these teachers have to get permission from parents to post videos and pictures of their kids in the classroom on the net?
Yeah, it depends what district, where you go, where it is. I mean, there is no consistent kind of policy that's out there right now. Some schools are fairly open and make sure that parents understand what kids are doing and really encourage the use of that. Other schools just block it all down and say absolutely not. We're not even going to go that route, even if parents give their permission. I think, you know, this has to be a conversation that schools have with all the constituents, with parents, with students, with teachers. And they have to, in some way, get the conversation going so that we understand why it's good on some levels, in some ways, for kids to post to YouTube or to TeacherTube or to some of these other places as well. But I think by and large, to your specific question, by and large, just about every district that does this does have parental permission to do it. Yeah, absolutely. But policies are all over the place. All right. All right, thanks.
And that may be a good lead-in to where we're going next, because that concept of literacies and both what it means to be literate in the classic sense and then how we apply that to what it means to be literate in this environment. Sometimes bringing those two concepts together, because I don't think that they're mutually exclusive, is one of the most challenging things for us as educators, is figuring out, in some cases, improving our own literacies in this type of environment in order perhaps to more effectively communicate traditional literacies that we also value. We have 3 presentations coming up at 11. I think all of you have a little folder like this. If you could just open it for a moment. In it you should find a map of the campus on white paper and a yellow sheet with a schedule. And if I were truly literate, I'd pop those up on the computer in front of you, but I just didn't quite get that ready in time. So if you could look at the paper. We have 3 presentations at 11 breakout sessions. You are free to go where you wish. Take a look and see what suits you. The 3 sessions that we have all build on and relate to the things that Will was talking about, but in different ways. In the Atlantic Veterinary College, which is number 10 building on your map at the top, is Dave Cormier's presentation, Grassroots Technologies, the Design Shop for Online Projects. This presentation with Dave is for those of you who are watching what Will's doing and going, sweet, merciful, that's cool, how on earth do I get there from literally 0 to 60? Go along with Dave. What he's going to do is actually open up the computer lab and let people kind of get their hands dirty and see where in your own curriculum you might be able to incorporate some of these things, help begin to build some basic literacies in that. If you're already Will Richardson, maybe you don't need that, but I know that a lot of us could really use that kind of ideas grounding for getting started. That's what Dave's doing. In the library lab, and I need to move back from the microphone, sorry. Building number 15 on your map is the library, is Sandy McCauley's presentation, New Media, New Literacies and Knowledge Building, a framework for 21st century learning. Sandy's talking about the participatory knowledge making that Will was discussing, what it means to know in this environment. So if you have a Wikipedia world, then the whole concept of what it means to have information has changed, and that's a conversation that we need to look at, and the pedagogy behind that kind of world, what it means to build knowledge with students. So that's what Sandy's going to be discussing. And in the Cali Lab, building number 13 on your map, Alana Langer has a presentation called The Image of Learning, and that little video that Will showed was really cool by Marco Torres. Alana is a documentarian and videographer who works down in New York and teaches at SUNY, and she's going to be doing both sort of I think some of the basics of how do I actually use a video camera, because if you want to use technology in your classroom, it helps to have, some comfort actually picking up the piece of technology yourself. But more importantly, what can I do with it in my classroom? So those are the 3 presentations at 11. I encourage everybody to grab a coffee, stretch your legs, and choose whichever of the 3 people you'd like to follow and make your way over to the presentations at 11. At 12:15, lunch is back here. We'll see you then.